So we're running behind time, so we're gonna ask Dr. Fabián Salvioli to give the presentation now. He's from Universidad Nacional, La Plata. Microphone is yours. Thank you so much for participating in this event.
It is a great pleasure for me to participate in this event on peace engineering organized by the University of New Mexico with my university, the National University of La Plata, and to share this session with these distinguished colleagues I heard with attention. The Engineering for Peace initiative is of utmost relevance to the future of our societies. I guess so, nationally and globally. And I would like, of course, to thank the organizers, in particular, Sue Wilder, Agostina Curcio, and Graciela Umberland, and of course, our guest and the moderator, the dear Dean Ramiro Jordan. I have divided my presentation in three parts, an introduction, a diagnosis, and finally, a human rights-based roadmap for effective engineering for peace. I am a lawyer, so sorry. So, introduction. Justice, diversity, and inclusion are powerful elements that make up the conceptual universe of human rights. To refer to justice, equity, equality, and inclusion is necessarily to speak of human rights. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations General Assembly of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This foundational instrument identifies rights that derive from the inherent dignity of every human person, which states must respect and guarantee. The Universal Declaration establishes its first postulate, and for me the most significant one, that all human beings, all, are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and immediately enshrines the principle of non-discrimination on any ground or condition. The contemporary definition of non-discrimination includes not only the traditional grounds of nationality, race, sex, language, or religion, but also other factors or situations such as disability, infectious disease, migration, social status, sexual orientation, or gender identity, or gender expression, etc. The universality, interdependence, and indivisibility of human rights was reaffirmed by the international community exactly 30 years ago by the Declaration and Program of Action adopted on June 25, 1993 by the Second United Nations World Conference on Human Rights held in Vienna. I was there representing Amnesty International, and it was the first World Conference on Human Rights after the new paradigm when the Cold War finished. The concepts of peace and security are intrinsically linked to human rights. It is impossible to conceive of achieving the objectives of peace and security if there is a lack of justice, discrimination, systematic and massive violations on civil and political rights, and deprivation of economic, social, and cultural rights for the vast majority of the world population. Sustainable development and a healthy environment also refers to human rights, as shown by legal instruments, studies, and mechanisms developed in recent decades by international bodies, as well as important pronouncements issued, including the creation of the Office of the Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights, as well as various case law and advisory opinions of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights on environmental issues. The second part of my presentation is a world that ignores human rights. While it is true that human rights are part of the formal discourse and agenda of institutions and states, at the substantive level, the behavior and actions of organizations and governments are totally different. At the international level, for instance, human rights are only addressed by specific bodies without impacting the majority of the organization's work. Human rights issues lack the necessary budget, and extra budgetary contributions must be sought to maintain minimum operations. In the United Nations, for instance, despite being considered the third pillar of the organization, its budget does not reach 4%. It's a shame. At the Inter-American level, the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court survive thanks to external voluntary contributions, because the regular budget allocated to them by the Organization American States General Assembly is totally insufficient. At the national level, it's the same picture. Although human rights have been incorporated into local constitutions, they do not permit the operation of all public policy and are relegated to the operation of only few departments. This peripheral place of human rights, both nationally and internationally, has generated a world with more exclusion, discrimination, violence, with an increasing hate speech, intolerance, and other serious problems, such as global warming and unsustainable economic development. So it is essential to recover the values that inspired the emergence of human rights at the end of the Second World War, and to put them into practice effectively in international organizations and countries. No more role-playing for human rights. The third part and the last part of my intervention is a roadmap. Human rights imply a global vision, but in order to work seriously on equity, diversity, and inclusion, the particularities of each of the situations of vulnerability must be understood, as well as the tools that exist to be able to deal effectively with such situations. Discrimination can be direct, indirect, and even intersectional. When there is more than one factor of discrimination, a clear example is that of an indigenous girl with a disability who may suffer discrimination for being a woman, for belonging to an indigenous people, and for having a disability. International human rights law has built very valuable concepts to work positively on equity, diversity, and non-discrimination. Gender perspective, affirmative actions, universal design, reasonable accommodation, and the best interest are some of them. The gender perspective is indispensable for examining aspects related to the human rights of women, as well as LGBTI persons. The same can be said of the cosmovision of the indigenous people and the principle of free and informed consents for matter-involving indigenous communities, or universal design and reasonable accommodations when dealing with the situation involving persons with disability. Public policy, the state, must be prepared to solve these problems. All of its organs, all of the organs of the state, must be familiar with the binding legal framework of human rights. I'm referring to the content of the obligations set forth in the international treaties ratified by the country. And to this must be added the implementation and production of specific UN treaty bodies, such as the Human Rights Committee, the CEDAW Committee, the Committee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the reports of the Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, and other human rights special procedures of the United Nations. Now, I am a Special Rapporteur on Transitional Justice, for instance. At the regional level, the reports of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, as well as the follow-up mechanisms of the Belém do Pará Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, are of a great value. In this way, human rights become the most viable tool for the success of peace engineering, resulting in societies with effective guarantees of the right to justice, equity, diversity, and non-discrimination. To achieve this, universities, I mean higher education, must incorporate the cross-cutting teaching of human rights, not just for law, in all careers, with the production of specialized bodies of human rights in all professional careers, because the university provides leaders who assume positions of responsibility in the public policy of the states. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fabio. Any questions for Fabio? Bruce?
So, Fabio, I want to echo what you said very much. And what we've learned is that there are codes of conduct for engineers, for mathematicians, for computer scientists, for data scientists, obviously lawyers, doctors. Those codes of conduct include what Fabio just said. To ask the feedback, what is the effect of building a tool and not knowing how it might be used? We don't want to be in that business anymore. We want to at least be thinking ahead to what is the potential misuse as well as good use for the tools that we are building. So just to know that part of being licensed as a professional will include a code of conduct that asks you to ask those questions.
I just wanted to ask you about the implementation of human rights, because I know the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, for example, in many of its sentences, struggles a lot to, implement those rights. I was just reading one according to environmental law, the case Barahona-Bray, in which one of the policies that the Inter-American Court implemented was to these capacitations on environmental issues. And I think it's very hard to implement all the rights, but environmental rights, how important they are nowadays and how little known they are for people. Do you think that those capacitations are a good mean for the public to know? And if so, in which level of capacitations? Because the Inter-American Court always says, let's capacitate the public officials, but I think that should be implemented into a wider level. And I wanted to know your opinion on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Two comments. The first one is about the code of conduct for all professions. Yes, it is true, we have the code of conduct, but this is in ethic level. I'm talking about something more deep. That means I learned law, and professors convince me that the application of the law is the objective and is not, because the Nazi legal regime was legal. So the objective of the law is the justice. The objectives of the medicine is the health. So, and health, justice, diversity, inclusion are human rights. So for that, my thinking is to apply human rights in our own disciplines. So to see our disciplines with the glasses of human rights. And that will make the difference. Because, as you said, it's frustrating. So states ratify covenants, but they don't do nothing. And I'm not talking theoretical. I conduct visits to countries. I talk with the victims, with their families, people with their lives destroyed. So it's not a role playing. From now, we should move to, and I link with the second question, to the implementation, to real implementation. And it's a particular issue of interest for me. I published my last book, and the name is The Age of Reason, and is for the legal value of the decisions of the international bodies. And my perspective is totally against the current perspective of my colleagues in international law. But that is another issue. So the problem of the implementation is the problem of all international law. We depend of the willing of the state, because we can't invade one state for the implementation of one decision of an international tribunal of human rights. So for that, we need pressure from inside the country. We need societies with democratic and human rights values. And for that, people who are against human rights, they don't want human rights in schools. They don't want human rights in the universities. They hate the possibility of sexual education in the schools, or gender, or diversity, because the tool is education. If we don't have societies empowered to demand the government's human rights, it is impossible. And concerning the capacitation and the training for public officers, I share your point of view. So I follow the case law of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights from the beginning, and sometimes it's very broad. And I will give an example. Perhaps you remember 2 years ago, it was a serious repression in Chile. Okay. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights, in the beginning of this century, ordered in 2 cases to train the armed forces and the police. And of course, we had training. The problem was that training was just cosmetic. Again, a role playing, because it is a shame that 30 years after the democracy in Chile, the police acts in the same way than during the Pinochet regime. So, and the training is in the hands of the universities. Then that is another issue to consider seriously.